Well, I come from a graphic design background. That's what I studied, and that's what I trained to do, and that's simply what I like. I love this cleaner, harder edge aesthetic, one that looks as if it was anonymously created, these kind of universal signs and systems. And that's the language I know how to use and manipulate and create and draw, and that's what I love making. So in a lot of cases I'll use images straight up out of the public domain and from Department of Transportation's or science systems, or maybe science systems that were developed for like the Olympics, for instance. And I'll use those unaltered because they give me the forms and the shapes that I want to use. A lot of times I'll change them and manipulate them and, just as you said, tweak them. The process for creating the originals always starts with a drawing and a sketch. And those get revised and refined and done so in multiple drawings and also with tracing paper. And then when those get a little bit tighter, then they get scanned and brought into the computer and cleaned up. And then usually there's a process that involves printing out those multiple versions, marking them up, going back and tweaking them again, and in the end coming up with the final drawing that is only in the form of digital information. And so all my drawings at the end of the day are just digital information. And therefore I can build upon this vocabulary and store them and rework them and recombine them and then cut them up further and recombine them. And the fact that they're all digital information allows the work to be so much more fluid than if I were just making things. I'm making information, not things. And at the end of the day, I still have to materialize those things. So I'll create screens, silk screens, from my files. And then with the silk screens, I'll build the paintings. I like plants, and I'm growing a lot of plants around the studio, and I'm looking at the root systems and growing the plants in water. And I think that parallels how the paintings grow. They kind of take on a life of their own, and the process of producing the paintings is getting a lot more organic. Well, one of the ideas with the work and with the larger scale paintings is that they operate a lot like fractals do, and you can back up and see a composition, and then zoom in and see details, obviously, and then maybe zoom in more, and they kind of get fragmented, and you kind of see even more details. I think inherently the universe is chaotic, and our coming to terms with it is about imposing order, and that's even reflected not only in the work directly and making symbols of kind of more complex thoughts, but also in the way I work. Environments I kind of create for myself, whether they be working environment or home environments, are pretty systematically ordered, and of course that is a way to kind of make sense out of chaos and exercise power over the universe and exert my own identity that would otherwise kind of be lost. I wouldn't even exist if I weren't imposing order on everything. And maybe for me it's within the different well-defined picture planes. All right, that's where the chaos will happen, and that's where I'll let the paintings do their own thing. Maybe that's where I'll let the universe do its own thing. But ultimately I'm still in control because I'm defining the area where that happens. Art being something that can communicate, I think, has been lost in a lot of contemporary art, and is one of the reasons why I make art. It comes out of a reaction against what's going on and just really hating contemporary art. I'm not one of those artists who goes to galleries, and not even one of those artists who really likes art. I liken myself more to a politician who hates what's going on and therefore wants to change the system, change what's going on. I hate art, and that's why I make art. And one of the reasons why I hate it so much is that if something fails to communicate, if a painting fails to communicate, it's usually assumed that it's the viewer's fault. And the burden is always on the audience. Either you get it or you don't get it. And if you don't get it, it's your fault. And I don't think that's the case at all. I really think it's the artist's fault that he or she fails to communicate. And I think in a lot of art school programs, there is there are lessons about visual communications that are left out. Lessons about communicating visually that are taught to students in the design program. And like I said, that's kind of the programs that I kind of came out of. And it always just really confused me why that was. Why aren't you teaching artists to communicate visually? Because that's what they do. That's kind of why I make work that hopefully does communicate, you know. And if it doesn't, then it's my fault, it's not yours. I was visiting my father over Christmas vacation, and he was so confused and had so many questions about, like, you know, because I'm getting into like car paint, like, well, how do you do that? How do you, you know, you just research it, you just do it. Like, how do you become an expert in anything? Nobody's ever going to give you permission to go and do something, or even give you the tools to educate yourself. You just have to go out and do it. People who make things in general, who don't feel that they have to wait to be chosen, who are just kind of doing their own thing and making their own thing, regardless of whether or not anyone's giving them permission or giving them funding or green lighting their project or anything like that. That's most inspiring to me, to see people just doing it. Distribution channels are such that, you know, you can hook up with great distributors all over the world. You know, the internet has a lot to do with kind of empowering these artists to set up their own shop and share their work more directly, you know, and more globally. You know, it's one thing to make postcards, it's another to find different ways to distribute them and share them. And so what I did was make cards of my own work to the exact specs of the Whitney postcards and also the MoMA postcards, and then went in and put them on their shelves, and they matched perfectly, you know, all the others. So there's a subversive kind of element to that, and then there's also kind of an empowering effort. You know, maybe you just kind of like, well, I'm just going to make my own postcards and put them up with everyone else's. That actual piece is the card, the bag, and the receipt. You know, that completes the transaction. I think I am kind of introducing a unique aesthetic to the art world, and one that has kind of, or one that has historically resided in the realm of design and even anonymous design. So that's one of my challenges, is to introduce this new aesthetic into a fine art, you know, context.